Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all and welcome to the channel. In this video we will cover methods inshallah. I wanted to discuss methods after we discussed classes and object instantiation. And also after instance variables and constructors. In fact, I actually recorded a video for object instantiation last night, but when I encountered constructors, I realized it would probably be best if we discuss methods first, then access specifiers, then we can discuss instance variables and constructors, mainly because constructors have a similar functionality to methods. Some even classify them as methods, with slight differences, of course. So I thought it would be best to discuss methods first, then discuss object instantiation, because methods are not necessarily indigenous to classes. They can be outside of classes. Well, technically speaking, everything is within a class, of course, but when I mean outside of a class, I am referring to a class that lacks the main method. So any class that does not have this green triangle or this green triangle here, that is what I was referring to. But everything must be enclosed or encapsulated within a class, of course. But what I meant is you do not necessarily need a method inside a class other than the driver class. The driver class is any class that has the main method. It does not necessarily have to be called driver. I simply called it a driver class because it is a driver class. It could have been named otherwise, possibly tutorial, for example, or test, or lab, or section, or practice. But regardless of the name, it would be referred to as a driver class. So since we can create methods outside of simple classes or non-driver classes, I thought we would cover methods first. Then we move on to object instantiation in an attempt to provide a clear and streamlined process for learning. And before we begin, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وارض اللهم عنا معهم أجمعين اللهم آمين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Now, what is a method? A method is a block of code that implements a certain task. It can add numbers, it can print an output, it can multiply numbers, it can accept user input. Any task performed through Java is known as a method. So what we were using, so main is a method. It is well, pun not intended, but it is the main method for program execution. But if you recall, what we used to print an output, this is known as a method that is part of a class known as the print stream class. That is the name of the class. And possibly if we click here, we can learn more. I forgot how to access information about, oh wait, maybe like, yeah, see? The print stream class. Here is the print line method. Here is the print method and the overloaded versions of print line method. Okay, so let us close this. There is an easier manner by which you can access information about a method. I do not remember the macro for it, unfortunately. So this is a method. Now, what are the components of a method? Now let us return here. Okay, so we have this. So the method name or the method signature, it is known as the method signature, is comprised of the following components. Actually, let us draw the tree diagram or the branch diagram. So we have access specifier, we have return type, and okay. So like so. Like that. Like that. There we go. Okay, so this will be the access specifier, and we will discuss these in a separate lecture, inshallah. Then we have the return type. We will discuss this shortly, bi'idhnillah. Then we will have the method name, of course. This, of course, is customizable. You can name it as you see fit. And lastly, we have what is known as a parameter or parameters if you have multiple parameters. These can be considered a local variable. They are similar but not the same, and I will show you an example, possibly not this lecture, but could be in a separate lecture, inshallah. Now, all of these components, particularly these three, but let us encompass everything. This is known as a method signature, and we will cover examples, of course, do not worry, inshallah. This is a method signature. What is in the code block is known as a method definition. So let us say, for example, I will provide an example for a method. You do not have to follow along at the moment. Let us say we will call it add numbers, and if you recall in the Java conventions lecture, we covered the conventional names for methods. Then we will have brackets here and this code block here. So this part here, this is the method signature that we discussed. And whatever is between the curly braces, this is known as the method definition. Method definition, where you define a method. Basically, what is it that you want the method to implement? Now let us take a look at an example without parameters and also analyze what this means. This we will cover in a separate lecture, inshallah. But before we move on to the example, I would just like to subcategorize this for just a moment. We have two main return types. And here, the return type can either be void, so the method does not return anything, or the method can return a data type. Which type of data does it return? That can be divided further into primitive or reference data type. Any variable or any data type, whether it is reference or primitive, can be returned by a method. It does not matter what it is, as long as you return it. And we may discuss the return keyword either in this lecture or in another lecture, inshallah. So reference or primitive like so. Now let us take a look at an example. So I will create another class, because when you declare a method in a driver class, it must have the static keyword. But since we did not explain what the static keyword is yet, we will create a new class just for methods. We will not include instance variables or constructors for this lecture. It will be for another lecture, inshallah. So this is how you create a new class. If you forget this, do not worry. We will repeat this for the object instantiation, inshallah. So you head over to the source code, the src file, which stands for source code. The out file is shortened for output. This is where the .class file is created, that we discussed in the previous video, created by the interpreter. This is where the bytecode is. And because it is created by the interpreter, this qualifies Java as both an interpreted and a compiled language, which we will discuss in the third portion of this tutorial, inshallah. So we will right click here, new, Java class. If you are using Eclipse, you will have the different class types open to you straight away. I do not know the style for NetBeans, unfortunately. For IntelliJ, you click on Java class and it opens the various class types that we discussed. I believe record was added recently for Java 17, so I do not know what it is at the moment. So we will call this class method examples. So here we can create as many methods as we want. Now we will start with a simple method, simply to illustrate the purpose of methods. So we will start with the public access specifier. This specifier or modifier informs the compiler of the accessibility of a method or a variable. If it is public, it is seen everywhere. If it is private, it is localized to a particular section. If it is protected, it is within a particular circle of influence, and the default is package, where you leave it empty. But we will discuss these in further detail in their own lecture, inshallah. So for now, simply use the public access specifier to inform the compiler that this method... Okay, apologies for that, I had to open the door. So when we create this method as public, we are informing the compiler that this method can be accessed from anywhere in the folder that you are currently using, or the project folder that you are currently using, which is an advantage of public, but it is also a disadvantage because the lack of security. So this is the access specifier. For the return type, we will say void, just as we have here. Void means the method returns nothing. That is why it is called void. If at the end of the method you have a return statement, then it has a return type. But if it does not have a return type, it is known as void. So if you are familiar with C, we always start the main method with int main, like so, and then we say return 0 to indicate that everything ran smoothly. Or you can say void main, but it will not return anything for you. So we will keep it as void, and then we will create a method that adds two numbers. I know you do not need a method for that because of the arithmetic operator, but this is simply to illustrate the functionality of methods. As we progress through the course, inshallah, we will tackle more advanced methods bi'idhnillah. And as we mentioned, for variable and method specifiers, the name of methods is uses the same case as the name of a variable, the camel, forget what it's called, camel hump, camel case, where the first letter of the first word is lowercase and the first letter of the second word is uppercase, and if there was a third word it will also be uppercase, and so on and so forth. You must add the brackets because that is where the parameters belong, but this is a non-parameterized method. Non-parameterized method, void, so it does not return anything. So possibly we will cover the return method here, the return keyword here, or depending on my availability, could be in a different lecture, inshallah. So I wish to add two numbers in this method and then print the result. So what would I do? I would say int x is equal to 4, and then int y is equal to 5, just as an example. Then I will say int sum is equal to x plus y, and then I will say system.out.println sum. Now when I run this, nothing will happen. Why? Because this is not in the main method. Everything must be executed in the main method. So what I will do is I will put this in the main method, but we will ignore the static keyword for now until we cover the static keyword in its own lecture, inshallah. So we will take this. I guess there is no need for this, so I will delete it. Yeah, it is rather difficult to teach everything coherently without having to skip a few topics. I apologize for that. So now we have this method here. How do I execute this method? Oh, I need to put static. And by the way, you can add these above main or below main. So this is where main ends, as you can see here by the highlighted portion, like so. So we can paste it here. However, yeah, because it is already defined, so I will delete it. I am simply adding it at the top because it is easier to see. So now we have created the method. Here is the method signature, here is the method definition, and these are this is the limit of the scope. How do I engage or execute a method? We have to implement what is known as method invocation. We have to invoke the method. We have to tell the compiler to start or execute this method. So everything must be done within main, of course, as we mentioned before. So how do I invoke the method? Method invocation. And if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you should be familiar with the invocation school of spells. For this example, we'd simply type in the name of the method, like so. The reason it is italicized is because it is static. Ignore this word for now. We will cover it later, inshallah. So if you type the name of the method like so, you have invoked the method, which means that when I execute this, the compiler will start the main method, then move to the first line that has code because it is procedural. It will read this method and then it will execute whatever is here. So this should print 9. Why? Because it is 4 plus 5, so it should print 9. Let us execute this method, or invoke this method to be more precise, and see what we have. As you can see, we have 9. This, of course, is a simple method. You would not need to add two numbers through a method. However, you can tackle multiple lines of code alongside addition in one method. That is the advantage of a method. You can collect multiple lines of code that serve one particular purpose within a method, as opposed to having everything in the main method. So this was a method that does not have a parameter. Now let us take a look at the parameters now and see what these parameters are. Instead of labeling or assigning local variables as such, now you limit yourself to 4 and 5. What if I want flexible values for x and y? What if I want 6 and 7 instead of 4 and 5? Now, these are hard-coded unless you change them like so. X is equal to 6 and y is equal to 7. But it would be rather ridiculous if you keep changing the variables in such a manner. So to make it easier for you, you use what is known as a parameter. Parameters are local scope variables or local variables. However, instead of having a definitive variable, parameters have a flexible value or a varied value. How? Let us take a look and see. Since I will be using the same name, I will comment this. Or actually, what I will do is I will copy these for the Zahi way, like so. And then I will remove these from compilation and parameterized method, but still returns nothing. So we will possibly cover return in this lecture, inshallah. So instead of forcing yourself to adhere to definitive values, we will use a parameter. Parameters are placed in the brackets here. If the brackets are empty, the method is non-parameterized. If the brackets have parameters, then the method is parameterized. So this is the structure of a parameter. And of course, you must know the data type of the parameter you will be placing. I wish to add two integers. So I will say int. Then I give a name to the parameter. Normally, parameters should have descriptive names as well as variable names, but some people, at least from my experience, I have seen people use shortened or easier parameter names without giving them descriptive depth to them, because the manipulation of the parameters within the code block speaks volumes, at least from their perspective. I disagree with that perspective, but it is up to you how you wish to write your code. So I will say int number 1, because I wish to add one number. Then, because I need two parameters, I will separate the first parameter from the second parameter with a comma. The space is optional. I prefer to separate them with a space as well, so it is easier to see. And then I will say int number 2. So now I have my parameters. The parameters can be as many as you want. We will also cover a specialized form of parameters known as var args, but that is a tale for another time, bi'idhnillah. So now I have these local variables that do not have a set value to them. We do not know what number 1 is equal to, and we do not know what number 2 is equal to. As you can see, their values are unknown. So how do I print the sum here? You use the name of the parameters that you set here in here without using the data type anymore, because they have been declared already. So you are for a parameter name, you simply use this portion without the equal. So here is how we will add these two here. You simply use the name of the parameters in your operation like so. And as you can see, they were grayed out, but now they have been whitened to indicate that they are being used. This depends on the IDE you are using, of course. So now this method has two parameters, unknown parameters, that must be added together to create a variable known as sum, and then the method will display the sum. So let us invoke this method now and see what happens. So I will do this. Now you see I have an error. What is the error? Change the signature of add number, remove the integers. What does that mean? Because these brackets are full as opposed to here, I cannot leave the brackets here empty. Here I can leave them empty because we do not have any parameters. Whereas because you have parameters here, the brackets must have matching parameters. However, because these are unknown, what you put here is what you wish for their values to be. For example, I wish for this to be equal to 5 and for this to be equal to 10. So what do? I pass these two values here. So I will say 5, comma, and 10. The compiler understands that the first number matches this number, and this second number matches this number, which means that when the compiler executes this, it will substitute number 1 with 5 and number 2 with 10, like so, to give me 15 as the sum. And that is the beauty of parameters, because it provides a great deal of flexibility for you when you are coding your method, and it also reduces the number of lines you need. These are not called parameters in this scenario. They are called parameters when you are defining a method or writing a method signature. These are called parameters. When you pass the actual value of a parameter, it is no longer known as a parameter. These are known as arguments. And this implementation is known as passing an argument. So this right here is known as passing an argument. Passing it to what? Passing it to the method so that the compiler can substitute these values with these parameters. Or another name for these, so these would be known as formal arguments, and these would be known as actual arguments. So formal arguments are parameters. Actual arguments are simply known as arguments. And if you shorten this to args, this is what you see in the main method here. But we will cover this in a separate lecture. We will have a separate lecture dedicated solely for the main method to explain this portion, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. So just to confirm, when arguments are placed within the parentheses of a method or a constructor, because constructors are methods, this is known as argument passage, or passing an argument to the method or constructor. So I should possibly put this on a separate line so it is easier for you to read. So this, I have now passed 5 and 10 as arguments to this method. Then the compiler will substitute 5 with number 1 and substitute 10 with number 2, add them together and print the sum. So let us execute the main method and see. 15. What if I wish to add 10 and 10? I can simply change the number and do so. 20. As you can see, you cannot implement this with the simple arithmetic operator. You must implement it through a method. This is what is known as a parameterized method. So we have the non-parameterized method and the parameterized method. Both return nothing, so they are void. Now let us return a data type instead of having void. For simplicity, we will return an integer. So we will, let me copy this and paste it here and transform these to comments. Let us leave it parameterized, but it returns an integer as opposed to void. The reason we will leave it as parameterized is because I want this flexibility as opposed to this astringency. Now, how do we return a data type? We simply remove void and add the data type that we wish to return instead. So we wish to return an int. That means we will type int. This tells the compiler that this method returns a value, and the value that must be returned is of the data type int. Now you will see we have a highlighted portion here that says the return value is never used, which means that we have to put a return value. We must. You cannot escape it because you will have a syntactical error here. So what does this mean? I want to add number 1 and number 2 to create the variable sum. Now if I wish to transfer control from this method to this method and continue onwards, I can use the return keyword. What does that mean? Let us take a look. I want to return this value, so I will say return sum and end. So this is the return keyword. So what happens here when this method is invoked? It adds 10 and 10 to give me 20, because 10 and 10. Then it returns this sum, so it returns 20. Returns it to where? That is the question. Returns it to whatever code lies after this. What does that mean? We no longer need this portion, so I will delete. So here the value has been returned as 20, correct? But because it has been returned, it is not part of a print statement, so I cannot see it. If I run this, I cannot see it because it is not in a system.out.println expression. So what do I need to do here to actually see this number? Once it is returned to the program, the main program. So it is localized here, the 20, but when I say return sum, it is returned to the main method. Let us draw this diagrammatically for assistance. So we have the main method here, and this is an array which we will discuss later, inshallah. So we have this here, and we have add number with int number 1 and int number 2. Okay, perfect. Here, what I will do is I will invoke the method add number 10, 10, which means I am asking this method to add these two numbers. What will happen here is that the method will add 10 plus 10 and then return sum, which is in this case 20. I wish to place this number back into main. As you can see, it is not in main, it is in add number, because main is an individual method and add number is a separate entity. Main does not have access to the sum here. Even if it was in a print statement, it still does not have access to it. So what I need to do is this. I need to take 20 and return it to main. This is what I need to do. Why? So that main can have access to it, so that we can manipulate that number later on in the code. So that is the purpose. If we wish to use this number later on throughout main, we must return it to main so that main has access to it. Then in main we can manipulate this number further. So that is the purpose behind the return keyword. Unfortunately, I must end the recording here, so we will continue this inshallah in another lecture. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Be safe, take care, and peace be upon you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim wa barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim innaka hamidun majid.